Welcome to the AirCon Vault, recordings of the live streams from AirWiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors, A Sound Effect, Game Audio Learning, Kilohertz, Audio Kinetic, Soundcuts, Sugi, Boom Library, Sound Warriors, and AirWiggles, the online home for audio people.
Hello everybody, hope you're having a good AirCon. I am Alison. Oh, we're at 50, we can go. I'm Alison. I am a freelance sound designer and all sorts of things. And I sometimes do work for Soundcuts. I worked with Adele, who set up Soundcuts 1,000 years ago at EA. So I do various things. I'm just going to start my talk. But one of the things, I'm going to get started. I might hide the chat actually because it's a bit distracting. So I'm gonna turn it off. All right, here we go. So, right, I am going to share my tab, and we're going to get started. So, I am Dr. Alison Bown. So I'm a sound designer and a cognition researcher. I got quite interested in understanding how sound works in the mind, and I also write, so I was quite interested in working with sound and language, and I do the things as well. These are some recent projects that I've done. I've done some VR, some R&D projects, do a lot of stuff with binaural, audio drama, audio theatre, things like that. So this talk, it's about presence, immersion and metaphor. So we talk a lot, don't we, when we're making stories and VR and games about presence and immersion, and maybe not the metaphor bit, but the metaphor is, it's a vast subject, this, and I could talk for literally about 5,000 years about it. But let's talk about presence and immersion, which is obviously an important thing that you want to achieve when you're telling a story, whether it be in a game or a film or an audiobook. So this talk is about, I've said it twice in two different fonts, just in case one of you prefers the other, but this talk is about soundscape's ability to evoke space, activate memories, and focus attention. So like basically, how do words work in the mind? How do sounds get you thinking? Actually, images do work in the same way. We just don't think they do because of our eyes feel like they're really easy, but actually pictures also do this, but I'm not talking about pictures. Let's not talk about the pictures. So this is like a published methodology that I developed for my PhD, which is very wordy. I wouldn't really advise reading this on an empty stomach, but I published a methodology about how to approach working with language and sound, and it's based in cognitive grammar. Cognitive grammar broadly is the way that your mind constructs spatial models and images when it's reading. Okay, that's probably, or listening to an audiobook. So like we talked about immersion. Now normally people talk about immersion in games as like really like massive graphics and like the best graphics ever, and oh my word, have you seen the graphics? And you know, there's literally 2K of memory left for the audio. Sorry about that. So we've got this thing called the book problem, which is, you know, presence is normally like seeing stuff and it being amazing and interacting, but this conundrum about like, but books are really immersive, and actually if you're reading a fantastic book, your mind is literally going to be full of images, and you're going to be like basically almost like have a cinema thing going on in your head. And the good folks in human computer interaction are very confused about this. They actually call it a problem, whereas I'm not sure novelists would call it a problem. So key to immersion is spatial presence, like knowing where you are in a scene, you know, like where's your point of view. So obviously if you think about a film, you might think about the camera, you might know whose point of view you're looking from. If you're reading a book, you know, you might be from the narrator's point of view, or you might be looking at all the characters on the page, and they call that an omniscient, you know, all-seeing point of view, where you see everybody as if everybody's on a screen acting out in front of you and you're kind of here. So sometimes you're in a scene looking around, and sometimes you're watching a scene. That's kind of broadly all we need to know. There's loads of links in these slides if anybody wants to go there. But so this is an audio book, so we don't have pictures, and we don't have interaction, and we don't have all the things that normally, you know, we think of as causing immersion. But no fear, because cognitive grammar is your friend. So I'm going to use broadly Far Cry. This is an audio drama that I did with Dad at Soundcuts. I was the sound designer and mixer, and I'm just brave. There was a really good opportunity for me to take this really wordy thing that I'd written for my thesis and actually put it into practice. So let's go back to presence means about sense of been there. So we want to put people there in the story world. It's also about managing attention. So things have got to make sense, and you've got to be able to pull people's attention around at the right time. So construction of a mental model and the allocation of attention, you know, like what is going on in your head and where do you look in your mind's eye? You know, where is your imagine going, and how do you get people's brain to construct this model, you know? So how does cognition broadly work? Gosh, again, thousands of PhDs, lots of dead academics all over the world thinking about this. But so if broadly, it means a top-down cue activates a bottom-up simulation. So if I'm going to show you what I mean by this rather than being confusing. So here's an exercise. All of you ready to do this in the comfort of your own home? When the word appears on the screen, just say it in your mind. We'll say it out loud, but say it in your mind and just try to observe what happens in your head. Okay, so that's one. That's restaurant. I'll take some, you know, I'll turn the comments on after this. But so restaurant, like however fleeting, you probably did get a little snippet of a restaurant in your head. Let's do another one. Fun fair. There you go. There's another one. And let's take this one. Spaceship, which of course you've never been on probably, but you still will have kind of, this is the key thing. The reason I put spaceship in is because you will have seen lots of spaceships in films, and therefore you have got things in your head that are reactivated by those words, which are memories of spaceships. I'm just going to jump on the chat now. Has anyone, yeah, so anyone else immediately imagine the ambient sound for a restaurant? Yes. Yeah, exactly. So like, what's with the chat redemption arc? I don't understand. Right. So, so like basically, yeah, you should have had flashes of things in your mind from those words, right? So now right, I am getting distracted by the chat. So I'm going to go back to my, right. So sounds can evoke physical sensations, sensory motor recall. So hearing the word restaurant, someone said they got ambient sound. So that is like that's your sensory system and your motor system, like physical things are like cued and all that kind of stuff. So if I hear a sound that causes a recall of a kick, my leg will activate. Believe it or not, if you read an action sequence, your body will start to be stimulated by it. And people read action sequences faster than they read description. So relevant to us, this has all been turned into a theory about musical grammar, how music can involve gesture and evoke sort of movement and ideas about like emotions and all this kind of stuff. So if something descends like, it would make us, you know, go like a physical like recall of a flop, these kind of things. Dynamic forces and emotions. Okay, so this is like really what, this is the most complicated slide in the talk. I put it there for anyone who like wants to be put off doing a PhD. But conceptual metaphor is like how you might think of, if you say you're going down a bit of a tunnel, you know, that's a conceptual metaphor, like you're stuck in a tight space and you're getting deeper and, you know, and that might mean that you're going down into something that you're not really liking. That's broadly like a conceptual metaphor. So that's a crash course to conceptual metaphor. In a real project, I worked on something where I was designing a user interface for real robots. The robots were taking apart nuclear waste in Sellafield. And we made a prototype where the operators were going to work in VR, and they were going to have a lot of auditory sounds coming from the robots who needed to be protected because they could blow up, because they could be in a radioactive area, but also they had a job of sensing gas in these hazardous spaces. So I had to design sounds that would make real operators think about, well, it's gas, they would think it's gas. Or what does heat sound like? We might think it's a riser, like the idea that things are getting hotter. What does causticity sound like? This was something I actually had to do. If you think about caustic and, think about your skin and it burning on the skin. So the sounds that I went for, I used this idea and I was like, well, a caustic sound would have to be something that sounds quite rough, and the texture of the sound was quite important. So that's a kind of like going from, what I hope was not too complicated, an introduction about conceptual metaphor, into actually how I put this into practice. So, it can be a really good way of going, how do I make people feel, like something's a bit rough in this scene, and, it's the way. So second principle, sounds can create spatial models, which we probably all know when we think about reverb and like the sounds of things in space, and that your mind goes, oh, it's a church, or oh, it's a tunnel, or oh, it's a toilet, and that's through remembering what that space actually sounds like. A bit of theory here. Source bonded sounds carry space. Like if you listen to a space, it's going to give you a sense of what that space is, or what the source of the sound is. And remember, we're talking about an audiobook design here. So this is where, like choosing proximity and not just reverb. I mean, reverb treatment's a part of it, but literally thinking, does it sound hollow? What these are all spaces. This is, that's a container. I can tell, I know what that is. And this is the kind of like how you start to build up fleeting images in people's mind, much like we did when we had the word restaurant or whatever. You have all these micro inputs coming in, second by second, as the kind of all the cues get laid together. So, sound and space, how being there relies on sound. People always say, don't they, like the pitches are most important, and then you're like going, what? Sorry, I can't hear you. Like most pitches, most films without sound on them are pretty boring, actually. Well, not all, but some of them. And I find that, well, I'm preaching to the choir here, so let's move on. So mental imagery in books. Just to remember, like, we're going to look at some sounds in a minute, but people engage in mental imagery when reading stories, and mental imagery is an important driver of absorption. It's been found that visualizing the story world will strengthen people's experience of absorption in a story. Okay, so like if people cannot construct the model in their head, or their attention is not held, they'll just lose interest and get confused or like switch off. So you have to really, when you're designing an audiobook, really be clear in your mind, like, what can I see in my mind? Being a writer, my job is to basically create what I can see in my mind in this sound design, so that other people can see it in their mind, and that is really the job of the writer, like to get what's in my head out and back in your head, and I have written more about this, which we'll get to, but I didn't want to go on about it now because it's a brief talk. So yeah, moves things, add the mood, create a world, we'll get to that in a minute. But like, I think, Greg, I worked on this with you. There's quite a lot of looking out of the window in this, is As Dusk Falls. Like a lot of stuff we couldn't see. It had to be done in sound. What are they looking at? What are they hearing? You only know what they're looking at when you hear it, and how far away it is, and all that kind of stuff. Like you're trying to get in their head. That's what your job is. So I have put a few files on here. I was slightly felled by the fact that we only had mono online, because a lot of the stuff in Far Cry was binaural, very much mixed for headphones, and I have got those files on a web page, which I'll give you at the end if you want to go off and have a listen to them. But Foley in Far Cry, the reason I'd done a special thing about Foley was because it was so important in this audio drama. Like in terms of what we've talked about, like building a model, knowing where you are in a scene, like how close people are. Like when you think about a book, you know, you're constantly moving around a scene and your like mind is like this camera that's zooming in and things suddenly, you know, come towards you, and you know, 1 minute you're walking through the door and then there's a cut and you're picking up the pencil. You know, it's kind of, you have to drive this kind of mind cinema. And Foley, basically we found that if all the characters just spoke to each other, even though the performances were fantastic and the actors were great and Adele had done an amazing job, if they weren't moving, it was just a bit flat, to be honest. If I didn't have time to do Foley in a scene, they were always the things that got back with revision saying, this scene, you know, needs to move more, it's a bit flat. So Foley was something which we used a lot to try to create the images of people. And going back to what I was talking about with Zabowski and gesture, you know, if you're a Foley artist, and some of you may be, you know that like gesture and mime and kind of this kind of idea that this character's quite, you know, moves in a certain way, and this character kind of, you know, is heavy or drunk or whatever, and like giving people bodies and moving them around in space became really important. So one character, her shoes were really important. It was like the only way of recognizing her. I think I've got a file here. Is this gonna work? So there's a rhythm to that I had to instruct completely from my imagination and around obviously the pacing of the dialogue that we had. So I have, you know, the script was so well put together, like it was very possible to see where the scriptwriter had put the characters in his mind, and I've named who that person is, and that person was the person who wrote the script for this is a movie director, and it really showed. It was really possible to create these scenes. This one, what did I put here? Drunk man. That was a drunk man falling off a stool. But again, it was like able. There it goes. That's the end of him. But I didn't have a Foley artist. You couldn't get a Foley artist to Foley this. There were no pictures, and the timing of the Foley was really, really, really important in terms of driving this kind of spatial model that I've been talking about for the listeners. People had to know what was going on and who was looking at who, and you know how close they were, and like whether you'd bring that character really close to the mic, you know, so you could literally hear their skin, because that brought them the proximity of that character right in front of you. You know, sometimes in this drama you are the character, you're in a first person point of view, and so all the Foley is kind of you, which is an interesting thing as well. So yeah, I had to edit all the Foley from libraries, and let me tell you, that was upsetting sometimes. Right, spatial audio and point of view. We've been here. I'm coming to the end of this talk, I think. Oh no, we're not. HRTF, you've all heard of that, but just in case any of you haven't, this is because this was a binaural drama. Some of the stuff I was asked to do was to mix binaural. Now it didn't always work because the scenes weren't right. Some of the scenes were watching all the characters from far away. Doesn't make sense to be binaural, because binaural implies, because of what binaural is, which is what this diagram is, it mimics how your own ears like hear sound, because of the, you know, the shoulder and the head and the way that sound hits it. It kind of puts sound outside your head, whereas a traditional like headphone mix of music would put music inside your head. You know, binaural is outside your head. And from a point of view of like designing an audio book, you can't have things that are binaural when actually, you know, you're not a character in the scene, if that makes sense. So sometimes when we had a first person point of view, I was able to do binaural Foley and binaural mixes. Examples of that work are on the website link that I'll give you at the end, because I couldn't play them in mono because binaural in mono don't really work. Little bit of theory here for those of you who are interested in immersive sound, like localization of sound sources through the design of our ears, which I just touched on then. You know, we're actually quite vague with our ears. We sort of use our eyes to pinpoint where a sound is from, but you can broadly get a sense if you're lucky enough to have working ears, because not everybody does. But yeah, and then also you might go, oh, I think that's a thing, and then you choose to identify it, you know, oh, that's a fear. Top tip, if you get a sound, if you put a sound really in someone's periperson, if you get your hand, go like this, and put it really close to your ear, it will make you recoil. So that's your body reacting. Like, you could do it for yourself now. That's your peripersonal space, and it makes you flinch. And you can do that with binaural stuff if you want to. And I'm going to give you an example at the end of a binaural theatre company who do that very well quite a lot of the time. And our brain can figure out what kind of space we might be in. And it's not just reverb, it is also, how to say, driving the point of view around it so you can pick out details. Are you hearing or are you listening? How do you drive attention? That's something to think about. From where do I hear? From what point of space represented on the screen? So there isn't a screen, but from what point of view am I in the scene? This kind of hypothetical, theoretical screen that you've made in your head through the words. Chion, you got to read Chion. If you're a sound designer and you haven't read Chion, you got to get out of town, really. Honestly, he's the man. Which character at a given moment of the story is apparently hearing what I hear? So this is about driving. He's calling this the point of audition. So rather than point of view, he's calling it the point of audition. Like, where am I listening from? And this is crucial if you're doing like an audio drama where sometimes you're amongst a scene, you know, like who's listening? Where are you putting people? And yeah, I briefly touched on this make it binaural thing, but sometimes the script was only first person point of view. I did, to my credit, try to make things binaural that I knew weren't really set up to be binaural, and they were sent back going, well, this is annoying. I'm like, yes, I know that's what binaural is. It's annoying if it doesn't fit with the experience that you design. You've got to design the whole experience around being binaural. You can't just really stick it on the end. Right, so yeah, in summary, these words lead a kind of camera movement in the mind. So let's read this passage slowly, okay? I'm going to just shut up, just read the white words and see what happens in your mind. Okay. So that was a sentence I just threw together with the direct idea of like how your attention can be led to a detail. And this is kind of what, if you're a sound designer, this is the kind of way that you think, you know, like you need, in that split moment, you kind of drawing the mind's eye to the river, you know, even though at the beginning it's the stone, because the stone is significant. And that's the kind of, your imagination needs to be transmitted, and the grammar, the cognitive grammar. For those of you who really want to know about linguistics, that word beyond, that's called a preposition, and that represents space. So you look beyond, and that drives your mind into, you know, looking beyond the thing in the immediate proximity. So there you go, and there's a little snippet into the joy that is cognitive grammar, like beyond, or where's another one? Deep within. You know, there's a sort of spatial thing there beneath our feet. You know, you're driving the eye all the time. Yeah, so in this way, you can use sound to draw the eye and manage attention. Attention is drawn to things that change. And that doesn't just mean everything's whizzing around, because that was the kind of binaural trick that is just actually annoying and confusing. it can also be about movement in the mix, the textures, what's foregrounded, it's basically, you know, good mixing. So you don't just put a fader up and leave it. You know, things have to balance and rebalance depending on where you're trying to like keep. If things stay still, it'll get boring fast, put it that way. And that includes something that starts awesome and punchy. If it just keeps doing the same thing, everyone will switch off and stop noticing it. In Gestalt psychology, they you know, they have this idea of figure and ground. You build a whole picture from details, and figures are things that move, and the ground are things that don't move and fade into the background. So sometimes you might want to introduce something and then let it fade into the background, and to do that you just simply stop moving it, you know, and then eventually fade it away. Yeah, so the words and auditory cues you use matter. They can put audiences in the center of a scene, direct their mental camera. Bit of the stuff about stereo, you know, mixing well in stereo, recording sound with an ear to capturing the spatial characteristics of the location can create space and strong mental images. If the landscape stays flat and still, our attention will falter. Things that move attract attention. Volume and EQ, not just panning. And texture, proximity. Great fan of bringing things forward, like very near. Yeah, if you just did a cheap and cheerful audiobook, you might just stick some backgrounds in and not move the actors around. And that would take it about, I don't know, 20% of the time that it took to make this. But whenever... that says easterly, that should say early. Sorry about that. So sometimes if I didn't have time to finish something and we just stuck an atmosphere in the background and we didn't have time to do the Foley, we just got those sent back saying they were boring and flat. And it was the exact same performance and acting as when we put the Foley and moved the background a bit and started driving the kind of mind's eye. And then we stopped getting notes for those scenes. The Foley lifted it as we could imagine movement, and also the gestures of characters like the drunk guy falling down. You know, you can see it and you can hear he's heavy and clumsy, and but he was, you know, great fun character. Yeah, bringing backgrounds to foregrounds, drawing attention, bringing the sound closer to the ear. Right, that was it. So if you want to have a little bit more, I'm literally gone live this morning. The first page is on alisonbown.co.uk. Having a website portfolio built. The first thing I've put up, and the only thing on there pretty much at the moment, is Far Cry. So I've written something different from what I've talked about there, and there's more examples of some of the binaural mixes. They're not excerpts from the drama because I didn't want to get into contravening copyright. So they are like mixes out of my door of just the Foley or some of the effects, but there's a little bit more on there, and it will be populated over the next couple of months with a lot of my other work, including the VR robot thing I was talking about. If you want to hear some brilliant binaural radio drama, check out Darkfield. Their stuff is amazing. They do stuff in shipping containers as well, if you want to do a live thing. And then there's a link there to the Far Cry, audio, where if you want to, you know, go and give Amazon some money to go and listen to it all. And that's it. I'm going to stop sharing this now, and I'm going to come back and get on the chat. Oh, alarmingly, there's like 72 of you now. Wow. This is weird. I'm just like talking to myself in a room, and I can't hear any of you. Can you hear me? Let's have a look. Chat. Yes. Cool. Right. Thanks, everybody. Oh, thanks for putting the link up. Has anyone got a question? I know that, my God, I just like literally did my thesis in half an hour for you. I'm happy to answer questions in the chat. Anyone who wants to email me, or like there's a link through the website. We're all figments of your, well, you are, Lewis, to be honest, a figment of my imagination. It was so interesting. Good, because it is, it is a kind of, I don't know if there's anything in there when you're saying you have to watch it back. Is there anything in there that you're like, what is she on about? Like, whatever. Oh, right. Here's a question. In order to, right, I'm going to take this question. In order to achieve different sound perspectives, do you record the dialogue in real spaces or in a studio to achieve clarity in the dialogue? I would always advocate a clean recording that's as neutral as possible of dialogue that you're going to use in this way. We did do a lot of work with IRs and placing the dialogue, but they were recorded in studios. I think if you're doing a documentary, obviously it's important for the reality of that to stay in space. And some people would record directly into the binaural dummy head with all the actors, but we didn't have the luxury of doing that. Adele had to direct the studios all over the world over different times. So, oh yeah, sounds carry their space with them. Yeah, that is Dennis Smalley, who is he writes really lovely things about sound. He's a very interesting person to read. He's a composer. Yeah, sounds carry space, and they do. Like, you can recognize, like I say, the structure or material of a sound. Question: why are certain words, nouns, prepositions that much more powerful at driving the mind's eye and ear? For example, if I said yellow, it's probably not as powerful than concrete. Well, Rainer, apologies. I would say you could say yellow in a context. So if I said, you know, the vivid yellow of the vase beyond the window, that's what's making it attract. Suddenly you can see the yellow because you can picture the location of it and the fact that it's catching your eye. I think prepositions, particularly things like across and beyond and below, are very good at building spatial models. So yeah, I think restaurant is a container for quite a big experience. Funfair is a big experience. It's multisensory. Yellow is not an experience as such. You can't really get your mind to remember taste it or whatever. I think if you have a word that's like basically a container for an experience, that's why it's going to be more arresting. I think that's probably my best answer. Right. So, okay. Right. I'm glad people found that interesting. Like I say, there's some more stuff on my website. I have written a fairly different take on it and talked a little bit more in depth about how I put it, and I've got different sounds on there as well. And I will be populating that website with loads more stuff just as soon as I can summon the time to do it. And some of you I'll see on Saturday. That's lovely, Scott. That's lovely. Boomerang backsplash. See, that's not a clear image. Boomerang backsplash. Like, that's not a clear image. Sorry, Scott. You're gonna have to you're gonna have to get a different shape for your backsplash there, I think. Do you think it would be advantageous to learn multiple languages and pick up on different cultural tropes and inflections? Right, because of the language thing. I think, right, so short answer is, Adam, there are some things that are culturally specific, like time is money is quite a Western thing. It's not time is money if you live in the forest in the middle of nowhere without capitalism. But things like container and depth and up and down are considered to be universal experiences that transcend dialects and words. So if you say hot in French, it'll still mean high, and that's based on your physical experience of being a human being, things being high, so it would still work. So some things generalize. Yeah. Yeah, off you go, Scott, and write your lovely poem to your Wii. Right, cool. Immediately you were talking about urine. I know. It wasn't me. Right, I'll be there on Saturday. Anybody else? I think I've managed to answer the questions. Cultural tropes and inflections, Adam. I think you're more likely to pick that up in the Foley and the way that people move and the rhythm of their speech, rather than the kind of stuff I've been talking about as applied to, you know, designing a sound, I think. Right. Okay. I think you're all just chatting amongst yourselves now. That's lovely. And yeah, I'll see some of you on Saturday, and I'll probably be around on the Hangout later a bit. And yeah. Cheers, everybody. I'm going to end the stream now. All right. Well, anybody who really is interested in this, I can talk about it for hours. So, you know, hit me up. Oh, question. Would you say not having Foley and SFX in general in audiobooks is due to budget and time constraints or thinking? Okay. Well, some books are written, are just narrated, aren't they? It's a narrator. It's Stephen Fry going, one day I woke up and I saw out of my window that the doctor had died. You're not going to be able to really dramatize that in the same way as this, which was an audio drama. It was written for performance and it was constructed as an audio drama. Whereas some books are literally written to be narrated and have got narrators. And I think, but yeah, budget and time constraint are definitely a thing. We definitely over-delivered on this, I think. So, okay. Right, everybody, I really am going to sign off now then. All right. Last chance saloon for any questions. Don't be shy. Oh, is sound more universal, as in less prone to misunderstanding than language, do you feel? Why is that? Well, there are some sounds that would be familiar to me if I lived in China that aren't familiar to me because I don't live in China. So I think that might be erring on the kind of territory that you're thinking about. And I think the sound of this makes sense to us because we know what this is. We know it's a metal bottle. But if you've literally never come across metal because you were born floppy on Floppy Island and metal's just not a thing, or it's the future and all the metal has been put on the moon by Elon Musk and we don't have metal anymore, we wouldn't know what that was. Does that make sense? It's a reference to something we've experienced. If we've not experienced it, we don't know what it is. All right. All right. I can see that happening. I know. I mean, they're out of control, these tech giants, Lewis, in my opinion. But right, really I'm going now. Enough of this nonsense. Goodbye. Thank you for coming to my talk. Elon Musk, lovely idea.